government's actions. I disagree with your basic premise. However, I say to them, we were horrified and as saddened as they were. They're lost. There's no question about that. But I disagree with you. David Koresh controlled those people's lives absolutely.
Attorney General Janet Reno cites intelligence of continuing child abuse inside the compound to justify the FBI's tear gas assault. In the aftermath of the worst cult murder-suicide since Jonestown, federal officials acknowledge miscalculations and misjudgments. About the concerns about child abuse inside the compound, how would the federal authorities have known that? A Justice Department official unnamed has told reporters, and it's been reported over the Associated Press, that agents here did have electronic listening equipment physically inside that compound and were able in that way to learn a lot about what was going on inside the compound. In addition, 5 suspects that had been held in the McLennan County Jail did have initial detention hearings. No surprises there. James Castillo, Clive Doyle, David Thibodeau, Derek Lovelock, and Graham Craddock, all detained, will now have attorneys and representation, and they'll begin their long legal process. We're still not clear on what charges will be filed against them as this investigation continues.
And Mike, it has to be an incredible undertaking for law enforcement officials in light of the fact that yesterday we literally watched the destruction of the crime scene.
This will be an extremely difficult process, and it will be a lengthy process. This is not only a rescue operation, it is in fact, Brad, as you say, a crime scene. They will have to videotape and photograph almost every aspect of their movements, the authorities' movements, and that is done so that they can preserve evidence in the event of future trials. That will be an extremely lengthy process. It could take, we talk days, it could certainly take weeks. One former policeman describes it as trying to investigate a plane crash and then another plane crash. The initial raid on the 28th, and now what happened here yesterday.
Okay, Mike, thank you. Well, in just a few minutes, a church in Waco will hold a memorial service for the victims in yesterday's inferno.
And Texas News 5's Kathleen McDonald joins us live from the Central Presbyterian Church with that story. Kathleen?
Well, Brad, the city of Waco today is beginning its healing process, trying to recover from the Mount Carmel tragedy. A citywide prayer service is about to get underway here at the Central Presbyterian Church in Waco. Texas Governor Ann Richards, a Waco native, is scheduled to arrive here momentarily. Several religious leaders from various denominations, the mayor of Waco, and hundreds of residents will be on hand for the prayer service. The deaths of the Davidian children are in the minds of many here. So is anger at cult leader David Koresh. Many of the residents are expressing shock, horror, and profound sorrow over the deaths of 87 cult members.
I think it's horrible, but I don't know how it could have ended any other way, because he was evidently the one that made the decision. I know it's frustrating everybody concerned, but what could you do?
I hate the kids had to die, but David Koresh, in my opinion, did it.
I feel sorry for all the young kids and women that was left up in there. But other than that, I'm glad it's all over with, and maybe we'll get back to going to, regular duties of life.
Kids didn't have a choice in it. The parents, and so they chose, that's the way they chose to go. That's their belief, but the kids didn't have a chance. I mean, they should have let them out.
Now, the tragedy that unfolded on the prairie has made a deep impression on everyone here. For 51 days, these residents have been enduring hundreds of federal agents and journalists and the infamous notoriety this cult has brought to Waco. And as you heard, many of the Waco residents say they are anxious to get on with their lives, but the memory of yesterday's tragedy will be forever on their minds. We will, of course, have more on this afternoon's prayer service for you on our newscast at 5. That is the latest from here. Brad and Kim?
Kathleen, what's the mood like out there right now?
Pretty somber. The folks are coming in fairly slowly. It is scheduled to get underway at about 12:15. The service is set to last about 30 minutes, but at this point, a lot of sorrow and a lot of grief here.
A lot of people, I imagine, very upset about the kids and so on and so forth. That's what you're hearing a lot of, talk about the kids, the loss of the kids' lives? For the most part, the grief is over the loss of those children. They're trying to come to terms with really what happened and how it happened.
Kathleen, how large a church is Central Presbyterian? Are they expecting a pretty sizable crowd?
Well, Brad, the church is fairly small. Only about a couple hundred residents can fit inside, and there are probably hundreds of journalists out here as well, and we'll be up on the balconies covering it, and then downstairs the church service, and there'll probably be an overflow outside of the sanctuary as well.
All right, Kathleen McDonald, live from Waco. Thanks a lot for the update. We appreciate it.
Well, here is a list of the people the FBI says survived the fire at the Branch Davidian compound. Clive Joseph Doyle, Jaime Castillo, Misty Ferguson, Derek Lloyd Lovelock, David Thibodeau, Renus Avram, Ruth Ellen Ottman, Graham Leonard Craddock, Marjorie Thomas. Now, 3 of the surviving cult members remain at Parkland Hospital this afternoon.
And they are all under very heavy security with ATF agents standing guard. As of this morning, all 3 have now been identified, and Texas News 5's John Garcia joins us live with an update on that situation from Parkland Hospital. John?
Brad, all 3 of the patients here are being treated in Parkland's burns unit. The condition of one of those patients has been upgraded this morning to good condition. The other 2 remain in critical condition. Now, the cult members were brought here yesterday, as we saw, by Care Flight helicopters just after 2:30 in the afternoon. During their treatment here, they remain in the custody of the ATF. They are being held at this point as material witnesses. Now, the 3 people here include 52-year-old Clive Doyle. He is in good condition with burns primarily on his hands. 17-year-old Misty Ferguson was burned on about a quarter of her body. She remains in critical condition on ICU. And 30-year-old Marjorie Thomas, who was the most seriously injured in the fire, is in critical condition with burns on about half of her body. Now, the ATF, as we said, is providing security. They have not yet talked with any of these patients.
ATF is not going to interview them. That'll be the Texas Rangers. And that all depends on the doctors. And when they say the people are ready to be released from ICU and turned over to regular hospital care.
An illustration of just how badly burned some of these victims were. The ATF was hoping to get fingerprints from them. They say they were not able to, however, because their hands were too badly burned. All of them are conscious at this point. One of the patients, however, was forced to give her identification to the ATF people who were trying to talk to her. She had to point to letters in the alphabet in order to spell out her name. So they're in fairly bad shape at this point. Kim, Brad?
John, have any of the relatives been able to visit with them yet?
Well, the hospital has been in contact, we understand, with a couple of the relatives. No relatives have arrived here at this point. We are not sure if and when they will be doing so. One of the patients, however, who is here, Misty Ferguson, the ATF is investigating it, trying to determine whether her mother was inside the compound and released before the fire. They have some information that that may be the case, and they'll be looking into that further.
John, we had heard reports that some people had been offering skin for skin grafts for the burn victims. Have you heard any of that from Parkland officials?
No information on that. We can look into that and get some more information on that for you a little bit later, though, Brad.
All right. John Garcia from Parkland Hospital. Thanks, John. The Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office still anticipates receiving the victims from the Waco cult disaster early this morning. 6 investigators packed up equipment in preparation for the monumental task of locating, documenting, and identifying the bodies. But now that the Texas Rangers are in charge of the crime scene, the local MEs may not retrieve the bodies. The chief medical investigator says that could delay the identification process.
Location is very important in many, many aspects. Perhaps the most important as far as identification is concerned is that there may be some particular group of people or family in the compound staying in a particular room, and therefore that will eliminate or narrow down the choices that we have for dental comparison, and therefore enhance time-wise our process of identification.
Dr. Pirwani expects identification of the bodies to be a bigger challenge than determining the cause of death. Kim?
The families of some cult members believed to have died in the fire are expressing their grief today. Lonnie Little's son, Jeff, was reportedly inside the compound yesterday. He says he thinks cult members started the fire.
Yes, it was. I believe it was inevitable. If they'd have waited a few more weeks or a few more months, it wouldn't have made any difference. He'd made up his mind from day one.
Little says although he's upset at the outcome, he does not want to second-guess the government's plan yesterday morning. Little met David Koresh in Waco in 1990. He says he tried to get his son to leave the cult, but was unsuccessful.
And we want to take a moment here to remind you that we do expect an NBC special report at about 12:15. President Clinton expected to talk about what happened in McLennan County.
And coming up next, we'll update you on a standoff that is still going on.
With Secretary Riley and with Senator Graham, the 3 of us served as governors together during the 1980s when we worked constantly on strategies to improve our schools, when we led often difficult and long efforts to upgrade the standards in American education and to improve the quality of instruction our children were receiving. There were no 2 governors whom I admired more during that period than the two who now stand on this stage with the Teacher of the Year. And I think both of them would join me in saying that after all the testimony has been heard and all the bills have been passed and the funds have been raised and allocated, it all comes down to what happens between the teacher and the students in the classroom. That's why today's ceremony honoring the National Teacher of the Year is so important. Tracy Leon Bailey has won recognition all across our country for highly advanced and innovative science programs. He's developed and introduced into Florida's classroom.
Right now you're hearing the President talk about Teacher of the Year. He is, however, expected to make some comments concerning the FBI's action and ATF action in McLennan County. We want to stay with the President here momentarily because, as I mentioned, he is expected to make some remarks concerning the fiery end of that 51-day standoff down near Waco.
The institution had one of the strongest science programs in the entire state of Florida, and it won numerous national and international awards.
Right. Again, as we mentioned, the President expected to comment on the situation in McLennan County. Obviously, he has a precursor to that in terms of his comments about Teacher of the Year. We'll get back to that.
Did they find any other tunnels or any other chambers in which people might have hidden out?
He said they can't verify that yet, again, because of the fire and the fact that it is still not out.
All right. Jim Cummins, will ask you to stand by there in Waco, Texas, because President Clinton, now at the Rose Garden, we'll show you those pictures at this moment, is making his way back to the microphone. He has just completed the ceremony honoring the high school Teacher of the Year, Tracy Bailey, who is a science teacher. He's the young man that you can see just behind the President, just put his arm on the President's back there. The President was attended by Education Secretary Riley and Florida Senator Bob Graham. All three had served as governors of their respective states at one time during the 70s and the early part of the 1980s. That's Dee Dee Myers, who is giving the President, we presume, a last word or briefing or two, because he's about to receive many questions on the Waco situation. So now let's hear what the President has to say about that.
Statement I would like to read now when the sirens go down on the events in Waco yesterday, and then I will be happy to answer the questions that you have. We may all get a suntan before this happens. It's like Florida, isn't it? We tried to make you feel right at home. They're going in a circle instead of... On February the 28th, 4 federal agents were killed in the line of duty trying to enforce the law against the Branch Davidian compound, which had illegally stockpiled weaponry and ammunition and placed innocent children at risk. Because the BATF operation had failed to meet its objective, a 51-day standoff ensued. The Federal Bureau of Investigation then made every reasonable effort to bring this perilous situation to an end without bloodshed and further loss of life. The Bureau's efforts were ultimately unavailing because the individual with whom they were dealing, David Koresh, was dangerous, irrational, and probably insane. He engaged in numerous activities which violated both federal law and common standards of decency. He was, moreover, responsible for the deaths and injuries which occurred during the action against the compound in February. Given his inclination toward violence and in an effort to protect his young hostages, no provocative actions were taken for more than 7 weeks by federal agents against the compound. This weekend, I was briefed by Attorney General Reno on an operation prepared by the FBI designed to increase pressure on Koresh and persuade those in the compound to surrender peacefully. The plan included a decision to withhold the use of ammunition, even in the face of fire, and instead to use tear gas that would not cause permanent harm to health, but would, it was hoped, force the people in the compound to come outside and to surrender. I was informed of the plan to end the siege. I discussed it with Attorney General Reno. I asked the questions I thought it was appropriate for me to ask. I then told her to do what she thought was right, and I take full responsibility for the implementation of the decision. Yesterday's action ended in a horrible human tragedy. Mr. Koresh's response to the demands for his surrender by federal agents was to destroy himself and murder the children who were his captives, as well as all the other people who were there who did not survive. He killed those he controlled, and he bears ultimate responsibility for the carnage that ensued. Now we must review the past with an eye toward the future. I have directed the United States Departments of Justice and Treasury to undertake a vigorous and thorough investigation to uncover what happened and why, and whether anything could have been done differently. I have told the departments to involve independent, professional law enforcement officials in the investigation. I expect to receive analysis and answers in whatever time is required to complete the review. Finally, I have directed the departments to cooperate fully with all congressional inquiries so that we can continue to be fully accountable to the American people. I want to express my appreciation to the Attorney General, to the Justice Department, and to the federal agents on the front lines who did the best job they could under deeply difficult circumstances. Again, I want to say, as I did on yesterday, I'm very sorry for the loss of life which occurred at the beginning and at the end of this tragedy in Waco. I hope very much that others who will be tempted to join cults and to become involved with people like David Koresh will be deterred by the horrible scenes they have seen over the last 7 weeks. And I hope very much that the difficult situations which federal agents confronted there, and which they will be doubtless required to confront in other contexts in the future, will be somewhat better handled and better understood because of what has been learned now.
Mr. President,
Can you first of all tell us why,
after
51 days,
outlined to you in your 15-minute phone conversation with... I'm sorry. Could you describe what Janet Reno told you in the 15-minute conversation you had with her on Sunday about the nature of the operation? Could you describe what she told you on Sunday about the nature of the operation and how much detail you knew about it?
I was told by the Attorney General that the FBI strongly felt that the time had come to take another step in trying to dislodge the people in the compound. And she described generally what the operation would be, that they wanted to go in and use tear gas, which had been tested not to cause permanent damage to adults or to children, but which would make it very difficult for people to stay inside the building. And it was hoped that the tear gas would permit them to come outside. I was further told that under no circumstances would our people fire any shots at them, even if fired upon. They were going to shoot the tear gas from armored vehicles which would protect them, and there would be no exchange of fire. In fact, as you know, an awful lot of shots were fired by the cult members at the federal officials. There were no shots coming back from the government side. I asked a number of questions. And the first question I asked is, why now? We have waited 7 weeks. Why now? The reasons I was given were the following. Number one, that there was a limit to how long the federal authorities could maintain with their limited resources the quality and intensity of coverage by experts there. They might be needed in other parts of the country. Number two, that the people who had reviewed this had never seen a case quite like this one before, and they were convinced that no progress had been made recently and no progress was going to be made through the normal means of getting Koresh and the other cult members to come out. Number three, that the danger of their doing something to themselves or to others was likely to increase, not decrease, with the passage of time. And number four, that they had reason to believe that the children who were still inside the compound were being abused significantly, as well as being forced to live in unsanitary and unsafe conditions. So for those reasons, they wanted to move at that time. The second question I asked the Attorney General is whether they had given consideration to all the things that could go wrong and evaluated them against what might happen that was good. She said that the FBI personnel on the scene and those working with them were convinced that the chances of bad things happening would only increase with the passage of time. The third question I asked was, has the military been consulted? As soon as the initial tragedy came to light in Waco, that's the first thing I asked to be done, because it was obvious that this was not a typical law enforcement situation. Military people were then brought in, helped to analyze the situation and some of the problems that were presented by it. And so I asked if the military had been consulted. The Attorney General said that they had, and that they were in basic agreement that there was only one minor tactical difference of opinion between the FBI and the military, something that both sides thought was not of overwhelming significance. Having asked those questions and gotten those answers, I said that if she thought it was the right thing to do, that she should proceed and that I would support it, and I stand by that today. Now, wait, go ahead.
Address the widespread perception reported widely, television, radio, and newspapers, that you were trying somehow to distance yourself from this
I'm bewildered
disaster.
by it. The only reason I made no public statement yesterday, let me say, the only reason I made no public statement yesterday is that I had nothing to add to what was being said, and I literally did not know until rather late in the day whether anybody was still alive other than those who had been actually seen and taken to the hospital or taken into custody. It was purely and simply a question of waiting for events to unfold. There was, I can't account for why people speculated one way or the other, but I talked to the Attorney General on the day before the action took place. I talked to her yesterday. I called her again late last night after she appeared on the Larry King show, and I talked to her again this morning. President is not possible for a president to distance himself from things that happen when the federal government is in control. I will say this, however. I was, frankly, surprised would be a mild word to say that anyone that would suggest that the Attorney General should resign because some religious fanatics murdered themselves. And I regret what happened, but it is not possible in this life to control the behavior of others in every circumstance. These people killed 4 federal officials in the line of duty. They were heavily armed. They fired on federal officials yesterday repeatedly, and they were never fired back on. We did everything we could to avoid the loss of life. They made the decision to immolate themselves, and I regret it terribly, and I feel awful about the children. But in the end, the last comment I had from Janet Reno is when I talked to her on Sunday, I said, now, I want you to tell me once more why you believe, not why they believe, why you believe we should move now rather than wait some more. And she said, it's because of the children. They have evidence that those children are still being abused and that they're in increasingly unsafe conditions and that they don't think it will get any easier with time, with the passage of time. I have to take their word for that. So that is where I think things stand. Helen?
Can we assume then that you don't think this was mishandled in view of the outcome, that you didn't run out of patience, and if you had it to do over again, would you really decide that way?
No. Well, I think what you can assume is just exactly what I announced today. This is the FBI has done a lot of things right for this country over a long period of time. You know, this is the same FBI that found the people that bombed the World Trade Center in lickety-split record time. We want an inquiry to analyze the steps along the way. Is there something else we should have known? Is there some other question they should have asked? Is there some other question I should have asked? And can I say for sure that no one, that we could have done nothing else to make the outcome come different? I don't know that. That's why I want the inquiry, and that's why I would like to make sure we have some independent law enforcement people, not political people, but totally non-political outside experts who can bring to bear the best evidence we have. There is unfortunately a rise in this sort of fanaticism all across the world, and we may have to confront it again. And I want to know whether there is anything else we can do, particularly when there are children involved. But I do think it is important to recognize that the wrongdoers in this case were the people who killed others and then killed themselves. Yes.
Still saying, President, were there any other options presented to you for resolving this situation at any point from February 28th until yesterday?
Oh, well, yes, I got regular reports all along the way. There were lots of other options pursued. If you go back, you all covered it very well. The FBI, you did a very good job of it. I mean, the FBI and the other authorities there pursued any number of other options all along the way, and a lot of them early on seemed to be working. Some of the children got out, some of the other people left. At one point there seemed to be some lines of communication opening up between Koresh and the authorities. And then he would say things and not do them, and things just began to spin downward. Whether there were other, on yesterday, in terms of what happened yesterday, the conversation I had with the Attorney General did not involve other options except whether we should take more time with the present strategy we were pursuing. Because they said they wanted to do this, because they thought this was the best way to get people out of the compound quickly before they could kill themselves. That's what they thought.
Did the government know that the children did not have gas masks?
Senator, our inspector is asking for a congressional hearing once the situation comes. Are you in agreement with that?
Well, that's up to the Congress. They can do whatever they want, but I think it's very important that the Treasury and Justice Departments launch this investigation and bring in some outside experts. And as I said in my statement, if any congressional committees want to look into that, we will fully cooperate. There's nothing to hide here. This was probably the most well-covered operation of its kind in the history of the country. Go ahead, sir.
There are two questions I want to ask you. First is, I think that they knew very well that the children did not have gas masks while the adults did. So the children had no chance because this gas was she said it was not lethal, but it was very dangerous to the children, and they could not have survived without gas masks. And on February the 28th, let's go back, didn't those people have a right to practice their religion?
They were not just practicing their religion. They were, the Treasury Department, that believed that they had violated federal laws, any number of them. Now, and let me go back and answer that. I can't answer the question about the gas mask, except to tell you that the whole purpose of using the tear gas was that it had been tested. They were convinced that it wouldn't kill either a child or an adult, but it would force anybody who breathed it to run outside. And one of the things that I've heard, and I don't want to get into the details of this because I don't know, but one of the things that they were speculating about today was that the wind was blowing so fast that the windows might have been opened and some of the gas might have escaped, and that may be why it didn't have the desired effect. They also knew, Sarah, that there was an underground compound, a bus buried underground where the children could be sent. And I think they were hoping very much that if the children were not released immediately outside, that the humane thing would be done and that the children would be sent someplace where they could be protected. In terms of the gas masks themselves, I learned yesterday, I did not ask this fact question before, that the gas was supposed to stay active in the compound longer than the gas masks themselves were to work, so that it was thought that even if they all had gas masks, that eventually the gas would force them out in a non-violent, non-shooting circumstance.
Mr. President, why are you still saying that it's...
Could you tell us, Mr. President, whether or not you ever asked Janet Reno about the possibility of a mass suicide? And when you learned about the actual fire and the explosion, what went through your mind during those horrendous moments?
What I asked Janet Reno is if they had considered all the worst things that could happen. And she said, and of course the whole issue of suicide had been raised in the public. You know, that had been debated anyway. And she said that the people who were most knowledgeable about these kinds of issues concluded that there was no greater risk of that now than there would be tomorrow or the next day or the day after that or at any time in the future. That was the judgment they made. Whether they were right or wrong, of course, we will never know. What happened, you know, when I saw the fire, when I saw the building burning, I was sick. I felt terrible. And my immediate concern was whether the children had gotten out and whether they were escaping or whether they were inside trying to burn themselves up. That's the first thing I wanted to know.
President,
Thank you.
why are you still saying it was Janet Reno's decision? Isn't it, in the end, your decision?
Well, what I'm saying is that I didn't have a 4 or 5 hour detailed briefing from the FBI. I didn't go over every strategic part of it. It is a decision for which I take responsibility. I'm the President of the United States, and I signed off on the general decision and giving her the authority to make the last call. When I talked to her on Sunday, some time had elapsed. She might have made a decision to change her mind. I said, if you decide to go forward with this tomorrow, I will support you, and I do support her. It is not, she is not ultimately responsible to the American people. I am. But I think she has conducted her duties in an appropriate fashion, and she has dealt with this situation, I think, as well as she could have. Thank you.
President Clinton, in an extraordinary news conference, the kind of event, the kind of issue that no president coming into the Oval Office can ever anticipate, and yet it does fall squarely on his watch. Today, taking questions about what happened yesterday in Waco when FBI agents decided that the time had come to try to force the hand of David Koresh, and it was forced in a way that they could not have anticipated, or at least that they did not anticipate. Others say that they should have expected that he might have tried something as desperate as setting a fire. We believe that some 86 members of his cult, including as many as 25 children, perished in that fire. The president said today, I accept the responsibility for the implementation of the decision to force the hand, but then he went on to put the responsibility for what happened to the cult members squarely in the hands of David Koresh. He said David Koresh killed those that he controlled. He bears responsibility for the carnage that we saw here. The president questioned apparently Janet Reno on several occasions over the weekend, and his final question, are you comfortable with all of this? Do you believe that we must go at this time? She said she had been told that they had evidence that the children were being abused, and that's what pushed her decision forward. Was there any contemplation of the possibility of mass suicide? He asked if she had considered the worst-case scenario in effect, and she was told, she told him that the experts at the FBI and others assured her that the risk was no greater yesterday than it would be today or at some point in the future. At any rate, this has become a small political firestorm in Washington. NBC's Andrea Mitchell now is in the Rose Garden. Andrea, what about the president's performance here today and his accepting responsibility for that? Do you think that will quiet some of the critics who say that he hung Janet Reno out to dry?
I think it will be at least the first step toward quieting those critics. He at least today laid out the questions that he had asked Attorney General Reno on Sunday and the answers that he had received. There still was the perception, and he didn't really respond directly to that, that the White House, which is widely known for its communication skill, had distanced himself yesterday by not having him call the Attorney General from 11 o'clock in the morning until after 11 o'clock at night. Now, during that period, of course, the firestorm and the entire tragedy unfolded. Yet he had not called his Attorney General, and instead she went out on television on many, many broadcasts, including our own, and he issued only a slight written statement saying that it was her decision, and he accepted that. So again, it's the language of her making the decision, his accepting full responsibility, but making, I think, a very important distinction. Today, I think what you zeroed in on is the White House strategy, which is to accurately portray David Koresh, of course, as the villain in this tragedy, and to say that they can't be responsible if, as the president described him, an insane person, a murderer, takes his life and all of those around him. Tom?
Thank you, Andrea. Indeed, they did call him dangerous, irrational, and probably insane. There are still questions to be answered in all of this. We have not had a complete resolution of why the FBI decided it must go yesterday after having waited for 51 days. If they were going to use the CS gas, that was the non-lethal gas that they thought that would force the people from the building, why did they do it on a day when the wind was blowing as stiffly as it was yesterday? Why did they not have emergency equipment in the area? If in fact there was evidence that the children were being abused, what is that evidence? Why wouldn't they be eager to share that with the American public, which has raised so many questions? And then ultimately the question about what happened in the compound itself. How could mothers allow their children to perish in a fire? How could adults be so blind to the teachings of a self-proclaimed Messiah that they would follow him into that kind of Holocaust? And then finally, where are the bodies that have not yet been recovered? All those questions we'll attempt to answer on NBC Nightly News tonight, and there will be a special report direct from Waco tonight on Dateline NBC at 10 Eastern Time. We'll have continuing developments on this important and fascinating story throughout the day on this NBC station. For now, I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News, New York.
This has been an NBC News.
Order the takeover was the right decision.
But I think she has conducted her duties in an appropriate fashion, and she has dealt with this situation, I think, as well as she could have.
Reno offered to resign. The president says he sees no need for that. Dale, Julia.
All right, thanks. Jim Gately live at the White House. Well, there's more coming up on the search for answers in the ashes, including a look at how yesterday's scenes of destruction are affecting children around the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
And then a little bit later, on a lighter note, we're going to show you how a two-pair adds up to a full house. That blessed event still ahead on News 4 Texas.
You're watching News 4 Texas at 5 with Clarice Tinsley, Dale Shornack, Richard Ray, Mike Bergersweather, and Craig James on sports.
The Waco standoff is over, but a similar situation at an Ohio prison is now in day 10. The latest on the negotiations coming up in World in a Minute. News 4 Texas has just obtained a copy of the search warrant that ATF agents were trying to serve on the cult compound February 28th when the shooting began.
And Barbara White joins us now with the very latest and those important documents from the McLennan County. I'm sorry. Hello, Barbara.
Hello, Julia. Literally, I just got these documents. They were released moments ago. I have not had time to read through them all, but it is a copy of the application and affidavit for search warrant on the raid that was initiated on February 28th. It's fairly lengthy. I did have a chance to skim through some of it, and it basically outlines why federal authorities, the ATF, went into the compound and launched that raid. This is information that we have been trying to get from the ATF for a number of weeks. It was released this afternoon by the U.S. Attorney. Quickly, it describes the compound. It also details all of the weapons that David Koresh and his cult members had amassed. In 1992 alone, this affidavit reports that Koresh and his followers bought $44,000 worth of ammunition. We will, of course, have more on this for you coming up at 6 o'clock. Julian Dale?
So, Barbara, quickly, it's clear that federal agents knew what they were going after. They knew the large amount of ammunition that they would be reached with.
Well, obviously, to search the compound, they had to have a reason, and it's all contained right here in the search warrant, the grounds that allowed them to go in and try and serve this on the 28th.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Barbara White in Waco.
Well, the tragedy in Waco, of course, had millions of people watching and talking.
And now many people are asking, what effect is this going to have on our children? Tim Ryan talks to teachers and counselors and kids.
As the buildings burned to the ground, slowly we all realized the children were still inside. The children we've been hearing about and worried about still inside.
I think they should have waited a little longer and used the lawyers a little more.
Okay.
Because just spending more money is better than killing all the kids.
Some teachers brought televisions into the classroom to watch this bit of history. Other kids, of course, saw it when they got home from school.
As much as parents might like to shelter their children from some of the harsh realities of life, the fact is they can't.
Like their parents, kids have opinions about who was right and who was wrong.
There's also the FBI's fault for not taking action sooner.
Well, I don't think that there was any way that the FBI could have done it sooner because David kept telling them how he was going to come out and everything, and they didn't want anybody to die, so they were willing to wait.
Still, teachers and counselors say very few kids seem to be traumatized by the way this ended.
They will know their own children. If there is something that's disturbing them, I don't think that it's something that they should bring up unless it's obvious that the child's in distress.
Many more kids were upset by the Gulf War. It happened so suddenly, and children felt threatened by it. This was more like a bizarre soap opera that dragged on for nearly 2 months. For kids, the ending may have been confusing, but not threatening. Tim Ryan, News 4 Texas.
Now, school counselors say that if your children are upset, it's important to let them do the talking.
And to let them know that it's okay to have feelings about what happened. Well, what about the children who were released from the cult compound? Many lost friends and parents in that terrible blaze.
Cult deprogrammer Rick Ross joins us now live from our Dallas newsroom with some insight on the children and that fiery end. And Rick, of course, the children are what are on our mind each and every night. The children who were victims, of course, and now, as Dale mentioned, those whose parents might have died. Any insight on how they're going to react to all of this news?
I think these children are probably terribly traumatized. First of all, they've been living in an abnormal type of world within a world for a long time. But my experience in working with children coming out of groups just like this is that with the proper help, with the proper professional help being sought, they can make that transition and get back on track and go on with their lives. And I have confidence that they will be able to do that. They're young enough, and they certainly have the help and support of many people.
Well, that's certainly encouraging news, Rick, but I wanted to ask you, we know there are other Branch Davidians. Are there other Wacos out there? You know what I mean? Other situations like this that could happen?
I think in Montana, the Church Universal Triumphant is a very serious problem. Of course, they built a number of bunkers. They're rumored to have large stocks of weapons and ammunition. It was even alleged at one point that they were in the process of trying to buy tanks. I think that group is very problematic, as are many, many others throughout the country.
We can only hope we never see again what we saw in the last 51 days.
Survivors who made it out of the fire, and the government has managed to remove only a few bodies from the periphery of the smoldering compound.
It's going to take a while longer for the scene to cool down.
The difficult task of retrieving and identifying the bodies of Koresh and the more than 80 cult followers suspected to be there has shifted from federal agents to the Texas Rangers and state fire marshals, who are treating the case as arson. But like so much about this bizarre and tragic standoff, the issue of how the fire began remains in dispute.
One of the tanks knocked over a gas lantern, and it started fire on some bales of hay that were lying around.
At least 3 people observed a person spreading something out in this motion. This was reported yesterday. Bent down, with a cupped hand, and then was a flash of fire.
Authorities say they have now made their way into the compound's underground bunker. There were no bodies there, and the air was cool and free of tear gas. Koresh, they say, could have saved the cult's 17 children with that bunker if he had chosen to do so.
He had those fires started. He had 51 days to release those children. He chose those children to die.
In the aftermath, there remain serious questions of why the FBI chose to go in such force with tanks and tear gas when negotiations with the cult were continuing, if sporadically.
This whole situation started with violence that was not justified, not provoked when the ATF went in there, and it ended in violence that was not justified and not provoked.
I think this was his plan from the beginning.
The FBI apparently had good information. Sources have told CBS News that electronic bugs went in with every delivery of food and supplies furnished by the FBI. CBS News has also learned that the original plan was to be a 2-day operation, beginning with the gas being lobbed through compound walls and windows, ending with the battering of the buildings, but only if necessary. But when the gas canisters wouldn't penetrate the walls, the plan was accelerated. Still, federal agents never expected it would end the way it did. Vicki Mabry, CBS News, Waco.
President Clinton denied today that he's been trying to distance himself in any way from the FBI's final, as it turned out, failed attempt to end the standoff peacefully. The president said that the buck does indeed stop with him. Correspondent Susan Spencer is standing by at the White House. Susan?
Dan, by issuing a printed statement last night while his attorney general was out talking about Waco, the president fueled talk that he was trying to distance himself, was trying to put the responsibility for Waco on her, a charge the White House today emphatically denied.
Aides insisted Ms. Reno's television appearances were strictly her own idea. President Clinton said he was simply waiting for events to unfold. The buck still stops here.
It is the decision for which I take responsibility. I'm the President of the United States, and I signed off on the general decision and giving her the authority to make the last call.
In an effort to shift attention from the operation itself to the man he said is the real culprit, Mr. Clinton called David Koresh dangerous, irrational, and probably insane.
Mr. Koresh's response to the demands for his surrender by federal agents was to destroy himself and murder the children who were his captives. He killed those he controlled, and he bears ultimate responsibility.
The president echoed the sentiments of many Americans at the sight of those burning buildings.
What happened, when I saw the fire, when I saw the building burning, I was sick. I felt terrible. And my immediate concern was whether the children had gotten out
But to suggest, as some have, that Attorney General Reno ought to resign over this,
I was, frankly, surprised would be a mild word to say that anyone that would suggest that the Attorney General should resign because some religious fanatics murdered themselves.
The White House believes that most Americans will agree with that, but partly out of concern that some may not, the president is appointing a special task force to investigate what happened at Waco, to see, he said, what questions we didn't ask. Dan?
Susan, classic effort by the White House at a preemptive strike at damage control. Successful, unsuccessful, or unclear?
I think it was probably pretty successful. The president clearly knew that many questions had been raised about whether he was forthrightly accepting responsibility. He answered those. I think the White House hopes, at least, this has been put behind them. They would also concede, some here, that this was not handled particularly well.
Susan Spencer live at the White House. Thanks. The U.S. Congress is about to ask a lot of questions about the cult siege and how it was and was not handled by federal agencies. And President Clinton promised today that he will cooperate fully with those investigations. For that part of the story, let's go to Rita Braber at the Justice Department in Washington.
While President Clinton insisted he has no intention of asking Attorney General Janet Reno to resign as a consequence of the Waco disaster, others in Washington are asking whether the Justice Department and the FBI acted too hastily. The House Judiciary Committee has already announced hearings.
I was surprised that the escalation took place, considering the fact that we understood that they were going to continue the practice, which has worked so well in the past, of patience and negotiations.
Members of Congress want to know why the FBI couldn't just keep waiting until cult leader David Koresh and the others were finally worn down. Why, if law enforcement officers on the scene were too fatigued to go on, reinforcements weren't found. And why the FBI didn't allow family members to try to persuade their loved ones to depart.
I think the result was the worst possible result. Now, why that happened, was that inevitable? Were there other courses of action as appropriate? We don't know that yet, and that's what we want to find out.
President Clinton repeatedly said one reason for launching the raid yesterday was concern about continuing child abuse. He gave no specifics, but law enforcement sources said cult leader Koresh continued to use strict discipline, beating children as young as 6 months, and that sanitary conditions had become unsafe. One source also said girls aged 12 and up were required to have sexual relations with Koresh, and that in recent days, Koresh withheld food and water from some of his less favored followers and refused to let them leave. But so far, law enforcement officials have not been required to prove any of the allegations against the cult. Even the search warrants behind the original February raid have never been unsealed. Now, with stepped-up congressional pressure, the nation may finally learn exactly what hard evidence provoked the government's actions in Waco. Rita Braber, CBS News, Washington.
It's even more apparent when you hear and you look around and you think about it that the fire and the apparent mass suicide, they were a national tragedy. For people in and around Waco, for relatives and other loved ones of the victims, it was a personal tragedy. Correspondent Scott Pelley reports on the morning after.
We pray, Lord, that thou would heal our city, our state, our nation.
Today, a prayer for healing, a search for answers. In Waco, the families of some cult members grieved and wondered whether more lives could have been saved.
We watched families, our friends, my son's wife, his children, all burn up before our very eyes. And we're pretty hurt.
Belinda Gainham's son, David Thibodeau, escaped the flames. His family did not. Now his mother believes more cult members would have surrendered if the FBI had allowed their families to contact them.
Hi, Dave. This is Mom.
Weeks ago, she was allowed to send 2 tapes into the compound, but other families were largely cut off.
We will never, ever know if our voices in a much stronger program would have had a positive impact.
It's a matter of judgment and consideration of what would be effective negotiation.
Today, the FBI said the families couldn't have done any good.
We bring in 70, 80 different families. Who's most effective? I think with the control that Koresh had, I don't think it would have helped us at all.
Now, in the aftermath, it is the tragedy of the children that is foremost in many people's minds. Not just those who died in the fire, but also the children who were released weeks ago. Now, many of them are orphans. Little Joanne Gurman lost her mother in the fire. When she was released last month, she carried a note from her mother to her older sister.
It says, by the time you get this note, I'll be dead. Take good care of Joanne. Love you much.
For those in the compound, it was prophecy. Koresh's own family believes nothing could have stopped his personal apocalypse.
You know, he was prophesying that he was God and that, you know, the end of the world had to end the way he was saying. He had no choice.
Now, for the survivors and their families, the end brings only more questions as they try to make sense of a twisted faith turned evil. Scott Pelley, CBS News, Waco.
Up next, live from the scene of the compound, we'll talk with the FBI agent in charge of the operation as the CBS Evening News continues live from Texas.
Allergy eyes. Red, sticky, itchy. Almost anything can cause them. Allergies can make your eyes look bad and feel worse. Allergy eyes are why there's Visine AC. Unlike ordinary eye drops, Visine AC is specially formulated for maximum allergy relief. It helps relieve itching, burning, stickiness, and gets the red out. So this allergy season, look and feel your best. Get Visine AC.
Maytag repairmen own the finest tools. And sometimes, they even get to use them. Maytag, the dependability people.
Everybody needs some.
$12 for every mile over the limit.
That's $300.
You can add fast, too. Next.
To send someone money fast, call 1-800-CALL-CASH or come to any Western Union location. Western Union, the fastest way to send money.
Back now live, just outside Waco, Texas, near the former headquarters of David Koresh and his branch Davidian cult. Joining me now is FBI Special Agent Jeffrey Jamar, who's been running things here on the windy plains of Texas. Special Agent Jamar, thanks for doing this. First, what's going on in the compound right now? We can see with our long lenses. We're right on the edge of the compound. We can see inside that agents are at work. What are they doing?
As of this afternoon, they were still waiting for the scene to cool down. There's still ammunition cooking, exploding. There's been explosions all along, so they're waiting for it to cool down. Before they go any further, I'm not sure how far they've gone now. There'll be explosives experts go through the rubble, and then the normal crime scene will begin.
Have agents been inside the buried bus, which was designed, according to Koresh, to provide safety for the children?
They were yesterday. I mentioned it this morning that agents went down there hoping that children might be there. They discovered it to be cool and didn't contain any gas, but there wasn't any children there.
He didn't put the children in there. You know you're taking a lot of heat. The Bureau's taking a lot of heat. Every federal agent is taking some heat from Washington and every place else. What do you think is the single most important thing for those people who are criticizing what happened here to know?
That the control of the circumstances from the time that we arrived February 28th have been in the hands of David Koresh. Every method we tried, normal negotiations, he would put up a barrier, we'd remove that barrier. He'd put up a new one. He let people out that he wanted out. He had calculated how much water, how much food he had, and decided how long he wanted to last. I think the children he kept, most of which were his own children, every step was controlled by him. We made a tremendous effort not to provoke any sort of violence. I'm happy to say for 51 days the FBI was here and not one shot was fired by the FBI.
But how did he get these people to do what they eventually did?
His control over them was based on their religious belief. The people who had a need for a Messiah, a new Messiah, were particularly susceptible to his pitch. He would capture them, absolutely capture them, and they would sacrifice everything they have for him. And that dedication was required, or he would expel you from the compound.
If you had it to do over again, you don't. What would you do differently?
I don't think we could do anything differently. I don't think we had any choices.
Your conscience is clear about what happened?
No, I feel very terribly about what happened. But I'm of the opinion that we did something we had to do. We did it in a very effective way. But the circumstances were not in our control sufficiently to keep him from doing what he did.
And you did it when you felt you had to do it?
Yes.
Agent Jamar, thank you very much. Appreciate you doing this
Glad to be
live.
here.
It's been more than 24 hours now since the siege here in Central Texas came to that fiery and deadly end. Hundreds of miles away, north, at a prison in southern Ohio, another siege goes on, and we'll have that and other news a little later on in the broadcast, so stay here with us.
This is a pretty twisted mixer. It goes from mixing to blending and back again. In fact, the new Handy Mixer from Black & Decker is the only one in the world with a split personality.
Imagine a rent-a-car company that offers special delivery right to your door. That's Enterprise. Call us. We'll come pick you up. Drop the car off. We'll drop you back. Enterprise, a special rent-a-car company that gives you special delivery.
She likes milk and it shows. She's got great muscle tone. She likes milk and it shows. Strong, healthy bones. She likes milk and it shows. Baby, soft skin, bright eyes, a healthy grin. He likes milk and it shows.
Milk does a body good with vitamin A to help keep skin smooth, calcium for strong bones, and protein to help build muscle. When you drink milk, it shows.
She likes milk and it shows. It does a body good.
When it comes to choosing a pain reliever, the makers of Tylenol believe the more information you have, the better. That's why it's important to know ibuprofen is different than Tylenol. Doctors know ibuprofen can sometimes irritate your stomach. In fact, most ulcer patients shouldn't use it. But they can take Tylenol. Hospitals use Tylenol 4 times more than ibuprofen. For effective relief that's gentler to your stomach, trust Tylenol.
Documentation, including the warrant for David Koresh's arrest. It also contains the affidavits and the information that federal agents put into their search warrant, although it is not the official search warrant itself. These are affidavits based on the information that went into that search warrant. And it basically lays out the grounds for the search and seizure of the Mount Carmel compound on that February 28th raid. It is the warrant that federal agents needed to carry out that raid. It includes, among other things, a description of the compound. It also includes interviews with neighbors who say they heard machine gun fire on the compound property. And based on other interviews, the warrant outlines purchases made by Koresh and the cult, including a reported $44,300 spent on firearms and related explosive paraphernalia. Those were purchased allegedly in 1992. Now, the warrant also details allegations of sexual abuse at the compound, and it quotes a former cult follower describing Koresh as becoming progressively more violent and abusive. Another follower is quoted as saying that David Koresh instructed his guards at the front of the compound to shoot to kill anyone who attempted to come through the entrance gate. Of course, all of this information is virtually useless because federal agents no longer have the opportunity to search that compound and see if any of those allegations are true. Let's go now live to Richard Ray, who has been at the compound site most of the day. Rich?
All right, Barbara, the grim and tedious task of searching for bodies is underway, and we're told that job could take weeks to complete. A full investigation of what happened here and why will take months, but a clearer picture of what led up to yesterday's deadly fire is slowly emerging. CBS News has learned through sources that the original game plan Monday was to pound holes in the wall and lob in tear gas over a 48-hour stretch. But it became obvious it wasn't working. Over the previous weeks, listening devices had gone into the compound with every delivery of food and supplies. The FBI could hear cult members laughing about the assault. The gas wasn't getting through. The decision to accelerate the process was made to tear down walls and get the gas delivered deeper and deeper inside.
They were, I think, very disciplined. They put their mask on. The people had masks. They were observed with masks. I think they gathered in an area, a central area where the impact of the gas was limited. I think the people were in such control, absolute control, that very few of them resisted any instruction until the very end.
And a terrible fiery end it was. The blaze began shortly after noon, 6 hours after the assault began. More than 80 people would perish, 17 of them children.
Those children are dead because David Koresh had them killed. There's no question about that. He had those fires started. He had 51 days to release those children. He chose those children to die. We didn't have anything to do with their deaths. There were sightings that were reported to you yesterday of people setting the fires at the corners. But there were other fires around the complex.
Agent Jamar defended the decision to hold back firefighters for a time because he says cult members were still armed and firing.
We know their firepower. When we got here, we already know they have 100 automatic weapons. We already know that. And they're prepared to use them. There's no way we're going to expose firemen to that gunfire.
Jamar believes some inside wanted to flee but may have been murdered by others when they tried to.
There might have been evidence of people who wanted to get out. There might have been some gunfire. But I think that one of the reasons we knocked a lot of the big holes in the walls there was to give people an avenue of escape.
The FBI says it's given its last news briefing here. The crime scene has been turned over to Texas Rangers. And so, too, the continuing questions about what happened at Mount Carmel. Once the bodies are recovered here, they'll be handled and identified by the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office. Dr. Nizam Pirwani, the Chief Medical Examiner, will supervise the special disaster team which deals with massive fatalities. Members should start leaving for Waco tomorrow, possibly as late as Friday. And here are the numbers they'll deal with. There were 69 adults presumed dead tonight, 17 children. 9 people survived yesterday's fire. 5 are jailed. 1 is hospitalized in Waco. And 3 are at Parkland in Dallas. 2 women are in critical condition there with burns. 1 man, Clive Doyle, is also a burn victim. He's scheduled to go into surgery, but Parkland won't say when. The big question tonight is still about the kids, and as we said, 17 are presumed dead, but the ones who were released early in the standoff are safe in state custody. They have not been told about the fire yet. Instead, the state is putting together a treatment team to break the news to the children. Meanwhile, in downtown Waco, it was arraignments for cult members who came out and escaped the fire yesterday. Barbara White was there. She joins us again with more on that.
Rich, tonight 5 Branch Davidians are being held without bond in the McLennan County Jail. They're awaiting their next legal step, which will be detention hearings. In the lead, 24-year-old Jamie Castillo, the only one in this group to face a charge of conspiracy to murder federal agents. Derek Lovelock, David Thibodeau, and Ramos Avram are being held as material witnesses. Shouting reporters got a response from Avram. He says cult members did not start the compound fire.
One of the tanks knocked over a gas lantern, and it started a fire on some bales of hay that were lying around.
Avram says there were no plans for a mass suicide. A 5th cult member, Graham Craddock, is also being held as a material witness. Fort Worth attorney Jeff Kearney, representing one cult member, says his client will plead innocent to the charge he conspired to murder federal agents. It may come down to a question of evidence.
From what I understand, that it was to the government's advantage that the compound either be demolished or destroyed or burned, because the physical evidence that might have some opportunity of disputing their contentions is now destroyed.
Belinda Guerin's son, David Thibodeau, survived the compound fire. She saw him for the first time today in court.
He looks emotionally and physically and spiritually spent. He looks like he's been through hell, which we all know that he clearly has.
She watched as her son was escorted back to the McLennan County Jail. His only words to her, "I love you, Mom." Everyone in Waco has been affected by this standoff, and today they started the healing process. Let's go back now to Richard Ray for more on that. Rich?
Barbara, Waco residents gathered at the Central Presbyterian Church today for a prayer service. The non-denominational service was called for all who needed help dealing with the tragedy at Mount Carmel. Governor Ann Richards, who was born and raised in Waco, made a special trip to attend. She said it was a painful time for everyone, not a time to pass judgment or second guess.
But we are not in a position or a place, I don't think, to determine at this time what should or should not have been done, nor can we guess what we would have done had we been in charge.
The mayor of Waco says the town is still reeling in shock from yesterday's events. Ministers say many people feel the tragic loss, that life is starting to settle in again with a lot of anger, I think, for all parties involved. Julia?
And of course, the overwhelming feeling is one of loss. Thank you, Richard.
President Clinton says don't blame anyone for the cult catastrophe except David Koresh. During a lunch hour news conference today, the president says that he, not Attorney General Janet Reno, is ultimately responsible for the actions of federal agents, and that in this case, the government is not at fault.
I was, frankly, surprised would be a mild word to say that anyone that would suggest that the Attorney General should resign because some religious fanatics murdered themselves. We did everything we could to avoid the loss of life. They made the decision
to immolate themselves. And I regret it terribly, and I feel awful about the children.
Today's Wall Street Journal could explain some of the FBI actions. The Journal says that FBI bugs inside Mount Carmel prove that David Koresh was thinking about provoking violence. The Journal also says that there were reports that cult babies were being beaten and that some children were sexually abused. President Clinton and Congress are beginning investigations into what happened.
Members of the Texas legislature are also mourning the loss in Waco. We'll have that coming up in a moment on Texas in a Minute for you.
While the film industry documents it. The making of a cult movie next.
Then, a Plano couple receives a very special delivery. Actually, not just one package, but 4 very special packages just ahead.
You're watching News 4 Texas at 6 with Julia Jackson, John Criswell, Richard Ray, Mike Bergersweather, and Craig James on sports.
I'm Craig James. Coming up later in sports, draft day is this Sunday, which means Jimmy Johnson has the wheels a-turning. We'll hear from him a little bit later in sports. Stick around.
The day's been a little longer than most. The drive home, a little more comforting. Lincoln Town Car was a smart choice. Advanced V8 power that announces itself quietly. The safety of standard dual airbags as well as anti-lock brakes. World-class luxury for the discerning driver who believes you shouldn't have to wait until you get home to get comfortable. 93 Town Car by Lincoln. What a luxury car should be.
I found all Jimmy's school needs there. T-shirts, pencils, pens, skateboard T-shirts, this odd cap with a brim on the back, all at Swabit's, Southwestern Bell, Yellow Pages. And I found a way to make sure he does his homework.
When TomTom hires somebody, they look for responsible people and dependable people. All right, here you go. I know my job. I know it real well. My meat is always fresh. My fish is always fresh. I have 7 family members that work for TomTom. I've been working with children for a long, long time. I love kids. And the kids love me, too. That's the most rewarding thing there is. I know they look up to me. I love my customers. How you doing, Charlie? I always try to please them in every way I can. I have a good job. I have the best job in the world, I think.
Welcome to the new Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers is not a diet. It's a way of life.
This is a picture of me before I joined.
This is you?
This is great.
Now is a great time to discover Weight Watchers. Join for just $10 and discover a brand new you. But hurry, this special offer's good for a limited time.
If I can do it, you can do it.
The cult standoff near Waco is over. That means the movies can't be far behind.
In fact, one film is almost already in the can. It is called Ambush in Waco, and it's being shot just north of here in Oklahoma. Reporter Lisa Jones takes us on set.
This is how Hollywood sees the shootout in Waco between federal agents and cult members of the Branch Davidians. The movie Ambush in Waco is being filmed in Mounds, and the cast and crew are busy trying to meet deadlines. Most of them say they've kept up with what's been going on in Waco.
We broke for lunch and we were kind of watching it on TV, watching the real compound go up in flames.
Okay, let's roll cameras. Fire in the hole. Rolling. Action outside.
Actor Tim Daly plays David Koresh in the movie. He says as an actor, he has to approach the part from Koresh's point of view, which has been difficult.
Another weak question! Weak! Weak! All of you weak! And it's killing me to see the weakness!
Daly says when he started the film, he thought the real-life ending of the standoff would be very different.
Well, as it unfolded, I thought first, I was very hopeful that it would end in a much more peaceful way and that we'd find out more about these people and about David Koresh.
You won't see how the standoff ended in the movie. The film will end with the events of February 28th, the day federal agents served the warrant and the shootout with cult members began.
The crew will be finished filming here in a couple of weeks, and the movie Ambush in Waco will air at the end of May.
The show's producers say then we'll see what caused hundreds of people to follow someone like David Koresh and ultimately give their lives on his command.
Producers say they're already thinking about a sequel to the first film so that it could run through to the standoff's fiery conclusion.
And the cult tragedy tops tonight's Texas in a Minute. Members of the Texas House took a moment today to remember the tragedy at Mount Carmel. A visiting minister gave a prayer for the children who died in yesterday's blaze. Greyhound and its drivers end a 3-year strike against the nation's only intercity bus company. The tentative agreement raises driver pay nearly 20% by 1998. Testimony begins in the capital murder trial of Robert Gonzalez. The 17-year-old has already been convicted of solicitation of murder in the attack on the parents of his girlfriend, Christy Caldwell. The Rio Grande River is at the top of a conservation group's list of most endangered waterways. The advocacy group calls it a horror story. In their pre-meeting, Arlington City Council members talk about enforcement of the city's anti-smoking ordinance in private businesses. Members meet in regular session tonight. And congratulations to the parents of quadruplets. The outlook is good for 2 boys and 2 girls. The parents from Allen already have 2 kids at home, and they're looking for a bigger car. Around Texas in a minute.
Looks like they're going to need a bigger car. All right, if you like today's weather, guess what? We have more on the way.
Mike Berger says it's looking clear and cooler. His forecast is coming up next.
No one could give you a better reason for driving a Toyota than a new Toyota owner.
I bought the Toyota to sell because it's a dependable car, it's nice looking, and it's very fuel efficient. I picked Toyota for my first car because it was the best looking car and the most affordable.
I knew exactly what I wanted when I went to my Toyota dealer. My Toyota dealer worked with me. It was affordable and it fit my budget. I really like driving my Toyota.
Find out for yourself how affordable a new Toyota can be. See your Texas Top 10 Toyota dealers today.
The warmth of the earth. Even on the coldest days, there's heat in the air.
This town must now come to grips with the indelible black mark burned into their soul by the false prophet David Koresh. It remains to be seen whether the apocalypse was an act of self-immolation or whether government impatience set the flames. But for now, Waco, Texas has taken its place in history alongside Jonestown. From the air and on the ground, this is a hard copy special report for Tuesday, April 20th, 1993, the day after.
I'm Terry Murphy in Los Angeles. Good evening. We have an entire team from Hard Copy in and around Waco, Texas. They've been there throughout the night in the aftermath of the tragedy of David Koresh's cult compound. Let's go now to Barry Nolan in a helicopter over Waco.
Thank you, Terry. For 51 days, people across this nation held their collective breath as if watching someone up on a ledge threatening to jump. Yesterday, David Koresh fulfilled his promise. He jumped, but he took the children with him. We begin our coverage of this tragedy with this report from Doug Bruckner.
It was 7 weeks ago that I was here in Waco, the morning after this whole terrible thing started, the morning after that fierce firefight in which the 4 agents and maybe a half-dozen cult members died. And now I'm back here at first light in the air the morning after the end of this horrible tragedy, flying toward the scene of a disaster that shocked not only Texas and the United States, but the whole world. There are victims from 3 continents that are believed dead in this disaster. It takes only a few seconds to fly over that cornfield that we stared across for so many weeks, 2 miles across into the compound. And you don't realize until you actually get over it, you can't realize from the ground that the compound is 77 acres and many buildings that are, of course, leveled now. That water tower that you see, one of the only parts of the compound left standing, is where one of the survivors apparently sheltered himself until he was able to get out of there. Now you see over by the satellite dish was where David Koresh's quarters were. That was the only part of the compound that was air conditioned. And FBI agents think that, or thought that Koresh's love for creature comforts and concerns about his own physical safety were going to prevent something like what happened yesterday.
We continue our coverage with this report from Diane Diamond.
Ranch Apocalypse. Oh.
We ain't got out, and he ain't out yet. I still believe that.
You have a little child here with you. What do you think about all those children?
I think it's a shame.
It's
I can't believe that someone would put their children in a position like that. You know, I can't believe that they would be that selfish. You know, because if you want to do that with your own life, that's fine. But, you know, you should think about your child. You know, that child didn't have a choice. I don't think that's fair.
For 51 days, we've been hearing about this, and now it's ended like this. What's everybody in Waco saying?
They were embarrassed that, I guess that it's here and nobody, and the people, I guess that they got people like that because, I mean, those are sad, it's a sad case for people when they can believe in a guy that much. I mean, they're got to be weak-minded.
What do you think today? You look tense. You look like you're about to cry.
Yeah, I am.
How come?
Because it was a slaughter of the innocent, the children.
Yeah. And there's no way to explain it.
Aren't you crying behind your glasses?
Yep.
Okay.
When you look at the flames and fiery death on this front page, what do you think about the most?
That should have been avoided. It should never happen.
Whose fault was it?
Whose fault was it? The lunatic. That's his fault, it is.
We continue our coverage with this report from Ames Yates.
It's very early in the morning, 6:30 here in downtown Waco at Schmaltz's Sandwich Shop. Folks here are recovering from the aftermath of the David Koresh tragedy. Ma'am, let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on the aftermath of the David Koresh situation?
It's kind of sad, all them kids dying if they died. It looks like it's a crime that somebody would do that to the little kids when they don't have a say-so in this matter.
What do you think the effect upon the town of Waco has been?
I really don't know. To me, it's still sad. And I imagine that's the same but the whole town. It's just sad that it happened.
Let me ask you this, ma'am. Does any good come out of something like this?
I don't know. I really don't know.
What do you have to say to the families of folks or kids that were trapped in there?
I'm sorry that it happened. I wish it hadn't, but it...
Do you think that the law enforcement officials handled the situation properly?
I think they did.
Why is that? Explain that.
I don't know. It seems like to me they did. They're just dragging on and on. He wasn't never going to come out.
We hear this so often, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and that was the first thought that was going through my mind. We glanced over there. There were a few wisps of smoke coming from the compound itself. Within a matter of minutes, it was thick, billowing clouds of black smoke. My reaction was disbelief. I could not believe after all this time this was the way it was going to end.
It's 7:45 in the morning here in Waco, Texas. People here are coming to work. Michael, tell me about your thoughts regarding the situation with David Koresh.
Sick individual.
How does it make you feel when you learn that all those people died there?
Awful. I don't see why they burn all them kids.
What do you think the general feeling here in Waco, Texas is now that it's over?
I think most of them are kind of glad it's over, but everybody kind of feels sorry for all the kids that are in there because they didn't need to go through that. He should have let them all out. If he wanted to burn himself, go ahead and burn himself. But should have let the kids out.
I'm really saddened about the whole thing, especially about the children. That really hits hard. I mean, that was really a bad move on his part. Terrible. Really bad. As far as I'm concerned, I think the man was possessed and just carried away completely.
What do you think he was possessed by?
Well, I think he was possessed by an evil spirit myself, but he let it go so far in his life that an evil spirit got into him and just completely taken over him and just ran him to muck, you know. It killed him and all the kids also. And that's what I think happened to the man.
Do you think that in any way the town of Waco has sort of got a bum rap from all of this?
Oh, yeah, of course. They're going to have a bad mark on them because of this. Can't help it but have that. When people hear Waco, they're going to think of Koresh.
It rained last night in Waco, Texas. There were violent thunderstorms and tornado warnings. It was as if nature itself and the heavens could not decide whether to weep or to rage about yesterday's tragedy. We'll be back with more from Waco, Texas in just a moment.
Welcome to the new Weight Watchers.
Weight Watchers is not a diet. It's a way of life.
This is a picture of me before I joined.
This is you?
This is great.
Now is a great time to discover Weight Watchers. Join for just $10 and discover a brand new you. But hurry, this special offer is good for a limited time.
If I can do it, you can do it.
Look who's flexing their flex.
America's Paint Store. From color matching to custom paints. America's Paint Store. More choices than any other store. America's Paint Store. Home Depot. Nobody beats our prices, guaranteed. On Minwax polyurethane finish. It's formulated with pure urethane oil to give wood a superior, long-lasting finish. Minwax makes and keeps wood beautiful. America's Paint Store. With paint experts you can trust. Home Depot, where low prices are just the beginning.
I'm Joe Barton. Kristen, our 5th grader, goes to Bowie Elementary right here in Ennis. Our hometown's probably a lot like yours. Conservative, hardworking, concerned about our children's education. That's why I'm voting against the Robin Hood plan. It takes away local control and hands over our local tax dollars to people who don't even know Kristen. That's wrong. The other Senate candidates don't want to talk about Robin Hood, but we know we've got to stop bad liberal ideas. That's why I want to be your next U.S. Senator.
Joe Barton, he'll make a great U.S. Senator.
You still haven't answered the question. It's not a question of guilt at this point, but people died because of the actions that the government took. What is it that do you feel that you have a responsibility, and what is the message that you have for relatives who lost people in that compound because of the government's actions? What is your message to those relatives?
I don't agree with you that they died because of the government's actions. I disagree with your basic premise. However, I say to them, we were horrified and as saddened as they were. They're lost. There's no question about that. But I disagree with you. David Koresh controlled those people's lives absolutely. Absolutely. He's the one responsible for their deaths.
Would they have died that day had you not gone in there?
I don't know if would they have died in July, August, September. I think this was his plan from the beginning. It's clear to us. It would have happened 30 days ago if we would have gone in there. So if you want to say, well, if the FBI would have done nothing, these people would still be alive. That's probably true. For how much longer would they have been alive? Are we prepared to wait that?
Say a year.
We were not prepared to do it, and our judgment was that we could do that effectively.
We continue our coverage now of the day after with this report by Doug Bruckner.
There are all kinds of unconfirmed reports in Waco today. Unconfirmed reports about the children being poisoned or in some way killed before the fire started. There's an unconfirmed report that some of Koresh's followers were shackled so they could not leave the compound once the fire started. Of course, everybody is disbelieving that so many people could stay in those flames. Woman ran out of the compound on fire and then tried to get back in when a heroic FBI agent came out and smothered the flames. You know, looking down on this scene, I'm reminded of probably the pictures that have haunted me more than anything else I've ever seen, and those were the pictures of Jonestown, Guyana, the late 1970s. over 900 people committing mass suicide there. And there are many comparisons and parallels being made in print and on the air, comparing this to Jonestown, and also comparisons being made to the raid on the MOVE headquarters in Philadelphia in the mid-1980s, and print reporters and columnists reporting and remembering that there were children killed in that MOVE fire as well. There was even an interview done with a relative of many of the people who perished in Jonestown, and she said, how could it happen again?
Now more from Diane Diamond.
You were the ones that got the survivor, the injured survivor, and took her to a local Waco hospital. What did she say? What was she like?
She was really quiet. She wouldn't speak unless she was spoken to. Basically, she was pretty unhappy. She didn't want to tell anybody anything, not even her name.
What did you see?
Just some, looked like some patients that malnutritioned a little bit. Just different things. They appeared to be pretty sick. A lot of pain, just some burns and stuff on one of my particular patients that I assisted with. Just had some burns, and he appeared to be in a lot of pain.
As a paramedic, you got out to the scene, and the first patient you see is a burn patient.
Mm-hmm.
What else did you notice about him?
I don't know if he's just naturally thin, but to me he appeared awfully thin.
Malnutrition?
Possibly, yeah. He just appeared scared. He didn't talk much. He just complained of a lot of pain to his hands. And he had already been given some medication for the pain, but we got orders for more, and I gave him some more medication, and that helped a little bit.
Did they thank you for your help, for rescuing him?
No, never heard it.
We continue our coverage with this report by Frank Grimes.
It's 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm standing outside Parkland Memorial Hospital emergency room, where 3 of the survivors are being treated at the burn center here. They are under guard by ATF agents, but ATF agents have not as yet interviewed them. The hospital is trying to get a hold of their families. Standing with me is Esther Bauer. She's a spokesperson for Parkland Memorial. Who's really in charge of the patients? The ATF agents say they're in custody, but I know as yet they haven't spoken to them, that it's only hospital personnel have spoken to them.
Well, they are patients, and we are a hospital, a premier burn center, and patient care does come first. And particularly the women, they're in critical condition. Now, the man, you'll have to defer to ATF agents as to whether he's been spoken to or not.
Well, ATF isn't telling us much right now, and that's about all.
Worth for identification, they'll use fingerprints, dental records, of course, visual identification to complete that. You know, we talked to several people who were almost cult members who had actually been recruited by David Koresh and been inside the compound. None of them thought that David Koresh would come out and surrender alive, but none of them thought that he would take so many people with him.
We'll be back with more from Waco, Texas in just a moment.
When a family stands together against the violence all around them. Life's a risk, carnal. When one son vows to uphold the law. Police! While another dares to break it.
You owe me this one, Buckle!
When the struggle to survive turns brother against brother.
You kill your own people! No!
All they have left is their bond of blood. Bound by honor. Rated R. Starts Friday, April 30th in select cities.
I lost 45 pounds 33 years ago, so weight management is a subject that's very important to me. In fact, we teach it from day one on the Jenny Craig program. So you're not just losing, you're learning about keeping it off, how to control your portions, how to make better food choices, how to deal with any situation. They're habits that will last you the rest of your life.
Get personal weight management at Jenny Craig. Pay as you go, just $6 a week. Call 1-800-92-JENNY.
Most places that sell subs are generous with the lettuce and stuff, but what about the meat? Let's see. Ooh, a lot of stuff. But at Arby's, their subs are loaded with meat, not lettuce. So their new hot ham and Swiss sub for $1.99 is filled with juicy, fresh sliced ham and, oh boy, melted Swiss on a toasted roll that can barely hold it. Arby's new hot ham and Swiss sub, just $1.99. Good deal. Oh, there's the meat.
Where?
That's right there under the pickle.
That's an olive.
Oh, yeah.
My opponents talk a lot about cutting government spending, but when I challenged them to cut their own salaries, as I did mine, they refused. When I challenged them to eliminate all taxpayer-funded junk mail, as I did, they
bodies
refused.
that they have been able to see are charred. Nothing no one is easily recognizable that we've seen. In addition to the concerns of the explosive materials on the site, we also now have health concerns, and we don't want anybody else hurt. There have been enough people hurt. We're going to take it slow and easy and make sure that the hurting is stopped here in McLennan County.
And while that investigation continues, we're looking into another aspect of the standoff. Documents released today are filled with evidence collected by the ATF before and after the initial raid on Mount Carmel. Nightbeat's Barbara White has the details.
Affidavits show ATF agents launched their initial raid of the Mount Carmel compound after months of investigation. The arrest warrant for David Koresh contains a laundry list of firearms and other explosive paraphernalia, all reportedly in the compound, including 8,100 rounds of 9mm and .223 caliber ammunition for AR-15 M16 weapons, 90 pounds of aluminum metal powder, along with one M76 grenade launcher. All told, the items the cult bought between October 91 and the raid amount to at least $200,000 worth. The arrest warrant paints Koresh as a man apparently obsessed with stockpiling weaponry. It quotes conversations Koresh had with others. He reportedly told a Texas State Human Services worker that he was the messenger from God, that the world was coming to an end. Koresh reportedly stated that it would be a, quote, military-type operation, and all the non-believers would have to suffer. It further states that Koresh has the upper and lower receivers for the firearms, which he is apparently trying to convert to fully automatic. In separate documents filed after the raid on April 13th, the ATF quotes a Branch Davidian member released from the compound. She brought out a notebook which describes various caliber weapons, outlining the techniques for the use. That document also gives further details of the February 28th raid. Signed by an ATF special agent, it claims that Koresh was dressed in black and armed with a rifle. Other men were arming themselves, and one man was seen with a string of hand grenades around his neck. Also in those documents, another ATF agent says that the day authorities tried to arrest Koresh and search the compound, Koresh vowed he would never be taken alive. Barbara White, News 4 Texas, Nightbeat.
Barbara says the one document that's been released is the initial search on the compound, and so far ATF officials are unavailable for comment. The siege is over. The grisly task of removing bodies has begun, and again, that's a job that could take weeks. For the first time since the February 28th raid, news helicopters were allowed to fly over what's left of Mount Carmel. On the ground, Texas Rangers are now in control, in charge of a crime scene that's little more than smoldering rubble. Investigators spent a good deal of time around the cinder block building that may have been the last stronghold of David Koresh. At one point, a man stood on the roof, pointing and counting at what we can only guess. In downtown Waco, 5 survivors were brought to federal court in chains. The first, Jamie Castillo, is charged with conspiracy to murder. The rest are held as material witnesses. One told reporters that Monday's deadly inferno was touched off by a government tank, and there was no suicide pact.
When the tank knocked over a gas lantern, and it started fire on some bales of hay that were lying around.
It wasn't said intentionally?
No, there was no plan for suicide.
It's a charge echoed by a Fort Worth attorney who represents Castillo.
I think the evidence is going to show that there was not any plan to burn down the Mount Carmel complex. There was no mass suicide plan, and it remains to be seen how the fires were actually started.
But the FBI says their evidence is overwhelming, that David Koresh ordered cult members to set it ablaze.
Those children are dead because David Koresh had them killed. There's no question about that. He had those fires started. He had 51 days to release those children. He chose those children to die.
Belinda Ganem watched with a friend as her son, David Thibodeau, returned to jail. The young man turned and said, I love you, Mom.
I know. It's a miracle. It's a miracle you pray for.
A miracle for one mother, a nightmare for many others. Flags are flying at half-staff around Waco tonight, symbolic of a town in mourning. Waco residents gathered at Central Presbyterian Church to pray for the survivors and for those who died. Governor Richards made a special trip from Austin to be in her hometown for the service.
It spoke about what we all feel in our hearts and the frustration that we feel in seeing things take place over which we have no control. It was a bad circumstance, and I'm sorry that the ending could not have been better.
The mayor of Waco describes the burning of the compound and the loss of lives as tragic beyond belief. Ministers say the entire community is struggling to understand why this happened. Well, criticism of Monday's action is coming in from across the nation, but President Clinton is standing by the decision to pump CS gas into the compound. He says he told Attorney General Janet Reno to do what she thought was right, and he takes full responsibility for her decision. But he says David Koresh deserves ultimate blame for the deaths.
Mr. Koresh's response to the demands for his surrender by federal agents was to destroy himself and murder the children who were his captives, as well as all the other people who were there who did not survive. He killed those he controlled.
It's just a matter of us having the patience to wait them out. In the end, the government lost its patience, and people needlessly lost their lives in Waco, Texas.
Reverend Jackson attended a seminar at SMU tonight as part of the university's lecture series. The military vehicles, the tanks, and the Bradleys all left about 5 this afternoon. There's a quiet and a calm that has settled over the compound. What's left is the search for bodies and for answers. Dale and Julia?
Rich, we understand the search of the debris of the compound could take a couple of weeks, at least.
Yeah, that's what they're saying now, maybe longer.
All right, thanks. Rich Ray outside of what's left of the cult compound.
Well, North Texans are also getting involved in the Mount Carmel investigation.
A group of local dentists is trying to help identify the victims of yesterday's tragic fire. Night Beat's Jose Grignon reports.
Dr. Keith Hudson is part of a 40-dentist volunteer disaster team that was put on standby by the Fort Worth District Dental Society.
And they'll beep us, and then we'll go on to the morgue and begin our process.
The volunteer disaster team was started 13 years ago and has been called into action on several occasions. Most recently, the 1988 crash of Flight 1141 at DFW Airport. Dr. Hudson has already told his patients that he could be out for a few days. When he and the other volunteer dentists are called into work at the morgue, they leave thriving practices behind for just one reason.
Feeling for the families that are involved and trying to get in and help them find out about their loved ones, and I know I would want somebody to help me if I was in that position.
Using dental records may help them identify most victims of the Mount Carmel fire. However, there may be some who died who may never be identified.
I think it's a probability in this case, particularly in the children, that we realize there won't be dental records established yet because of their confinement to the compound and probably lack of dental treatment.
As soon as many of the victims' remains arrive here at the medical examiner's office, the gruesome task of identification then begins. That process could take just a few hours, but it could also take several weeks. Jose Grignon, News 4 Texas, Night Beat.
Over the next few days, the disaster team doctors will attempt to gather medical records from the U.S. citizens who were inside the compound. But several dozen victims were foreigners, and it may take longer to get those records from Great Britain and Australia. Well, the horror of mass suicide brought on by unyielding devotion to a deluded leader is difficult to comprehend.
Hard to understand, but is certainly on the minds of many tonight, from young students to the experts. Night Beat's Phil Alvarado has our report.
David Koresh's flaming final statement sends only one message, many believe, that cults are invariably based on ironclad mind control, poisoning the individual spirit. And leaders like David Koresh, who claim divine guidance, almost always suffer from multiple personalities.
People thought they were dealing with a criminal, you know. He wasn't a criminal. To talk to him, you've got to be able to get to the God part. That the God wasn't God in heaven. There was God in his head. It was a part of him.
Dr. Jerry Mungadze has spent 15 years deprogramming cult members. He sent a message to the FBI, warning that David Koresh was like a madman with a gun to his head, who would be pushed over the edge by high-pressure tactics. The FBI never responded.
And the police are out there, say, come out here. And they say, no, don't come close. If you come close, I'm going to kill myself. Okay. And the people say, well, we're coming close now. And the person goes, pew. What conclusion do you make?
It's a bunch of crazy or a bunch of nuts. It isn't.
Hope Evans hasn't seen her daughter since she was recruited by a cult on her college campus. That was 15 years ago. Today, Evans' Cult Awareness Network spreads the warning to young people, like these students at the University of North Texas.
And I can't imagine committing suicide for, if that's evidently what happened, for one person who claims he's God when he obviously wasn't. I just can't imagine myself ever doing that.
The position to know was that the damage that was done to the building by the tanks blocked off the entrance. They couldn't get in there. The debris and the damage on the inside blocked the access to the only escape that they had other than by running out.
And the survivors say the FBI should have known that as the building crumbled, fires were waiting to be lit. The survivors say this tank is rolling up over a piano, and there were gasoline lanterns called Coleman's nearby and throughout the compound.
Of course, this was in the middle of the day, so you wouldn't necessarily have had lights or lanterns at all, right?
Well, no, that's not correct. In fact, during the many hours that I spent inside, we were in an interior room that had no windows. It was pitch black in there until we got Coleman lantern in so we could talk and see one another.
Mr. DeGuerin, did any of these survivors actually see a Coleman lantern going over a fire ignite?
No. No, none of them have said that to me. They've all discussed that as a possibility, as even a probability, because of that's where their light source was.
After talking to the survivors, DeGuerin says there's a lot to question about what the FBI says happened here that day. For instance, FBI sources have said that one of the survivors came out of the building and said he heard someone say, light the fire, light the fire. DeGuerin says he talked to that survivor who said the opposite. He heard, don't light the fire. The FBI also claimed that snipers were looking into the building and could see people with torches actually lighting fires. DeGuerin says there was so much confusion, how can the FBI be sure what those snipers saw? And finally, the FBI says it has a crucial piece of evidence, infrared tape, showing that 3 separate fires started in different parts of the building, separate fires. DeGuerin says that's just a misinterpretation of what they're seeing. That he's talked to his own experts who say it's perfectly possible in a building like this, with a long hallway and wind racing through it, for fires to appear to be separate, that are in fact instantly connected by vapors.
Ventilation seems to be the most important aspect. And here we had a day of 17 mile per hour winds gusting up to 30 miles per hour. The act of opening up holes in the front of the building where the wind was coming from increased the wind effect on the inside.
His friends say DeGuerin, a sophisticated defense attorney with a list of formidable clients, blames himself for not preventing the conflagration. Because he was the only outsider to spend 30 hours talking with David Koresh, many of them in Koresh's bedroom.
It was no more nicely appointed than the other rooms. The furniture was a little bit nicer, but not significantly so.
And you say there was no air conditioning in the room when you met with Koresh?
I didn't see an air conditioner.
Or feel it?
Oh, no. What the world had heard was there's this religious nut holed up in Waco. And I expected to hear some kind of ranting and raving. I was prepared for it. I wasn't expecting what I found, and that was a very rational, charming, intelligent young man.
DeGuerin says he saw something in the bedroom the FBI hasn't admitted. Bullet holes in the ceiling that could only have come from above the day of the ATF raid. Koresh was wounded that day. DeGuerin says the wounds weren't infected, but Koresh was weakened, apparently by loss of blood.
It drained, I'm told, for quite a while. And when I saw it, it was healing, but it was still causing him problems. Once he got some iron and some vitamin supplements, it helped tremendously. And of course, he was being nursed by the nurses.
Was he using drugs?
No.
He wasn't using any painkiller? Did you ask him?
I asked him that. They didn't have painkillers. They had aspirin.
In the meetings, DeGuerin says, Koresh fed him Snickers, M&Ms, chicken stew and took him on a tour of the compound. DeGuerin remembers how the women and children lived.
Women that had children usually lived in a room with their children and had no roommates. And the rooms had what you'd expect a bedroom to have.
It's tough for you?
Yeah. They had cutouts and alphabets and animals on the wall and toys, and the kids were there, and they seemed to be serene and healthy and clean.
DeGuerin, ever the defense attorney, challenges those FBI sources to offer real proof that the children in the compound were abused.
If they were such good people, why didn't they send the children out when the tear gas came pouring in, rather than risk anything for the children?
I'm told by the survivors that no one was being held against their will, that...
but these were children.
I'm told time and again that anyone that was in there was free to go at any time.
You know, Mr. DeGuerin, people sitting at home listen to you, and they say, he is painting the portrait of this innocent group of people who, however eccentrically, are just arming themselves to make a little money and because they believe in the defense. This completely harmless group of people, and it simply cannot be true. You don't build an armed camp like that. You don't behave like David Koresh if you're just an innocent group of people.
Yeah, I hear that, and if I've got any responsibility in this case now, it's to tell what I know, what I saw. Last night I saw Senator DeConcini on Larry King, and not only has he already made up his mind, he brought with him to his interview some visuals, a hand grenade and a 50 caliber machine gun bullet. Maybe the president really needs to appoint an independent panel to investigate.
Have the survivors told you that they'll begin the cult again?
No, they haven't. I haven't discussed that.
Would it surprise you if they did?
They don't view themselves as a cult. They view themselves as highly religious people. You know, I don't have any answer to what's going to happen to them in the future. The point is that
Parents. To be in the cult, you had to agree to kill your children. I haven't heard that. If we were a threat to David Koresh, to the cult, we were to die, and our parents were to agree to kill us.
It's my understanding that my stepmother
you agree with
left. I agree with that. My understanding, my stepmother left when David Koresh commanded her to kill my sister and brother.
I'm puzzled here. When did he say this? Because I don't remember seeing anything like that when I was there.
That's been common knowledge with us for a while.
Well,
I mean, he doesn't advertise this. He's not going to advertise
well, yeah, he was
this.
good at not doing that, yeah.
What do you mean, good at not doing what?
Well, what he did was he would, I know he would, first off, he would show me things and do things that I could accept, and as soon as I accepted certain things, then that prepared me to accept newer things that he had that would have been harder to accept. And the reason why he did this was to make it easier on the followers. It's not because he was trying to deceive us, it's just because what he had was he believed was right on, but he was trying to lead us into something really good, and he didn't want to throw it all at us at one time.
Yeah, it's a slow seduction.
Yeah.
Why did you leave?
I didn't. I got ill, and he sent me home.
Yeah. Mentally ill or physically ill?
Mentally.
And he sent you home?
Yeah,
Well, that's kind of an act of a nice guy.
Yeah, it is.
You think he was a nice guy?
Yeah, I think he was, Yeah.
He appeared to be.
He appeared to be.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. What was, your father is in jail because of why? What, Vicki?
Attempted murder.
And who did he attempt to murder?
Federal agents.
He was there.
He was there
February
in
28th,
the compound.
right?
He tried to gun
When we
his way
saw
out.
that, when we see that picture, which is ingrained in our minds now, of the agents on the roof trying to get in
to the compound and we see shots coming out.
He was there. When they captured him, he had 2 semi-automatic weapons in his possession. There was 3 people during the initial firefight that tried to escape. One was shot, one was captured. They thought the one got back into the compound. That was my father. He had escaped.
We should say that these are allegations.
Yes.
I mean, we don't know this for fact because your father hasn't been brought before court. But you're frightened of him.
Yes. I fear that if he gets out, my life is in danger.
Why would he come after his daughter? Because of the things you're saying?
Because that's what he was told. He was told to kill me if I was a threat.
Mark, why did you leave?
I left in about 77, you know, as a young man. I was approximately 16 years old then. And the thing was very different in those days. But the message they had never...
Did you try to go back?
I tried 4 years ago to return and become re-involved.
And this is once David Koresh became the leader?
Yes.
And what happened? Why wouldn't they let you back?
Well, see, I did go back. I made a couple of phone calls to Koresh, my father, whom I called from Waco to see if I could go back. I recommended I talk to the man. And the first conversation lasted about 20 minutes. And frankly, when I got off the phone, my head was spinning. He did exactly what everybody, you know, has said he was able to do in 20 minutes, made me a believer.
Boy, you know, I look at him. I've seen those pictures of him. I've heard his voice. He doesn't seem to be a soothing personality to me. He doesn't seem to be one who can seduce me into believing anything he says.
You have to have a personal, you know, one-on-one to understand. And also you have to be ready in a certain way. I was down and out in Mississippi, and I needed something. And there it was.
So in other words, you all were vulnerable.
Certainly.
Yeah. So you wouldn't have, I mean, something had to happen to you, Robert, right, for you to want to be there, right? You had needed something in your life.
Correct, Yeah.
That's why everybody went there. They needed something.
But you've been a product, your family, for 30 years, Vicki. You didn't even have a chance for a need, did you?
No, most of the kids didn't. They were just taken there and raised like that.
Mindset of David Koresh.
I felt that what we had here was a really seriously disturbed, mentally ill individual who was suffering from a delusional disorder, looks like paranoid schizophrenia, would meet the criteria for that in all probability, was getting progressively worse, was capable of, when pushed, was capable of doing almost anything. So those are kinds of information that we were passing along.
So wait a second. I mean, I don't want to set the stage here, but yeah, go ahead, Robert.
That's what I went through when I got out of the cult. I felt like the way my mind was exactly the way Koresh's mind was like. That's why.
But you were mentally,
I was, man. I was. I feel that's why I felt he's the same way. That's why I agree with him about the way Koresh was, and that's why I believe that he's a good person that's just really led the wrong way.
So now the government's strategy is to shrink the perimeter, get closer and closer, use a battering ram, knock down building after building after building in order to shrink the world of David Koresh. Does that sound like something you would do?
That's a real challenge,
For
Maury.
a paranoid schizophrenic?
Well, that's a real challenge. That's a real difficult call because what you have here is probably the longest siege that anybody had ever gone through in terms of law enforcement. I don't know of any single event that has gone over the Atlanta prison riot of '87. That was 12 days. And when you look at what happened at Lucasville at exactly the same time...
This is in Ohio, in which the hostage-taking situation in Ohio ends peacefully, right?
Exactly.
Peacefully.
Right.
The guards are let out, the inmates go back, and all they ever got was that the government or the authorities would review their demands, what they wanted in terms of prison conditions.
They were dealing with someone who said he was Christ and prophesied that he was going to die and take his followers.
Yeah, that's the difference here. We have a messianic leader who is
deluded with believing that he is Christ. And within that delusional system, it's so firmly entrenched and powerful that there was really no breaking that.
So battery rams and Bradley tanks work in a situation like this?
They're digging up tapes now as we speak, but something I said, and I'm not the only one, you cannot approach these people with any action that they will perceive as being aggressive, or there will be more tragedy.
Lawrence, you want to join in?
I was listening to how you analyzed David Koresh, but that didn't fit Wayne Martin to me.
Yeah, well, tell me about that.
Well, see, I knew Wayne Martin, and to me, Wayne was a sensible person. He understood what was going on in the world.
Lawrence, didn't David Koresh use Wayne in terms of being kind of his attorney?
Yeah, Wayne represented the church. In fact, the church was his #1 client, and he didn't allow anything in his practice to interfere with the church.
Now, I understand that, but don't you always want to have kind of a normal front? I say that in the context of, I covered the aftermath of Jonestown. Jim Jones had some normal, sensible people representing him back here in this country. There were attorneys who were members of Jim Jones's church, too.
Yeah, but Wayne was a normal, sensible person back here in Waco representing Koresh and the church, and representing other clients and other people who needed legal assistance, and he did a good job.
Maury,
I mean, there was nothing wrong with Wayne as a lawyer and his thought process.
To understand here, we have a totalistic cult situation, okay? The typical cult recruit into a totalistic cult is an idealistic, well-educated, well-functioning person. That's the kind of people they want in these groups to help further their cause, to recruit, to gather money, to further the cause. What happens under a thought reform program, as I firmly believe the people in this group have gone under, is they begin to take on a cult personality, okay? And the cult personality ends up overlaying their true personality. And you can see people flipping in and out of the two personalities. They have the cult personality and then their personality. So that's how you get people functioning.
Yeah, not only do I agree with that, but the description of our gentleman in Waco is that this is a normal human being, well-adjusted. Normal human beings, well-adjusted people don't stockpile weapons.
Okay.
And when they're presented by an issue with law enforcement, most any one of us would say, okay, let's take it to court, because we trust that. But what's characteristic here is exactly the thing I think that Keith is describing, is that there is a delusional set
for it is on this roadside bluff that overlooks the compound where all the t-shirt vendors were set up. And it's the place where the public could take a look at where the compound was. Here it's tightly restricted, only the press and officials can get in, but there the public could stop by. And
it's like watching a launch at Cape Kennedy, huh?
Exactly. And at first, the mood changed as the siege progressed. At first, it was this big event that was happening, but as it went on and on, the t-shirt vendors were there with their funny t-shirts, the top 10 reasons why David Koresh should come out, and the David Koresh End of the World Tour, the Guns and Davidians End of the World Tour, you know, funny t-shirts poking fun at Koresh and his followers. The people that would come there as the siege wore on, it was almost like a party feeling. People would come there and music was playing. Sometimes they'd dance. They'd have their picture taken.
When did it change?
People began to get real cynical as by end of the second month, and then on Black Monday, as they call it down here, when they saw the fire go up, all of a sudden the vendors told me that perhaps 1,000 people instantly gathered there to watch the flames, and it was very solemn. You could hear a pin drop, and then local officials came and cleared everybody out. One vendor told me that he got the feeling it just wasn't right to sit there and have tourists gawk at people dying in flames.
Don't think of Waco as a cult city. We're a normal city, and we invite you to come to Waco and visit us.
I know you represent Waco, and I know you want to put your city in the best light, and I don't think anyone holds Waco responsible for what went on.
Maury, there's a very interesting
very interesting piece in the Dallas Morning News concerning a report written by a fellow described as an independent religious researcher, Francis X. Leahy, who wrote a report for the FBI that he completed and turned in on April 8th, 10 days before the Great Fire, in which he predicted that there was no possible ending that was peaceful that he could foresee given Koresh's beliefs. He predicted in this report, again 10 days before the fire, that the siege would end sometime after April 18th, that it would end after an aggressive move by the federal agencies, that it would end in a great fire because Koresh's people believed that the sixth seal could not be opened until, according to the fifth seal, Koresh and all his followers died and ascended to heaven.
We'll be back in a moment after this. We'll be back.
I waited patiently on the Lord. He inclined to me when he heard my cry. He brought me up out of a horrible pit.
It's tough to be asked to pull someone else's wagon when you're struggling to pull your own. But now some won't hire taxes for the working middle class. Well, I oppose new taxes, period. I'm Jack Fields. I want results for government spending. People work hard to pay the taxes that provide welfare benefits, so I think folks who receive welfare ought to work to get those benefits. Let's make welfare a two-way street, not a handout. If you agree, I'd like to be your senator.
I'm Julia Jackson, coming up on News 4 Texas.
It was one of the biggest sex scandals to rock the military. More than 100 officers involved in a night of treachery. What really happened inside this Las Vegas Convention Center? A revealing report from the Pentagon. Close-up pictures of the ruins on Mount Carmel. The media are allowed on the grounds for the first time. And 2 Texans are named among people's most beautiful.
That's tonight on News 4 Texas.
Let's do